What constitutes a professional grade audio converter? Many people will say it's just the sound quality, but I would like to argue it's also flexibility and reliability. And the M1620 Pro gives you exactly that. Little disclaimer, I used to work for RME a few years, but now I'm fully independent. And my love for RME dates back to 2009 when I bought my first Fireface 400. Back in the day, the Fireface 400 or the Fireface 800 were just the interfaces to get. Total Mix was insanely flexible. It still is. I mean, you can see it behind me. I use it every day. The drivers were just the best in their class. Super stable, super reliable, and that is still true. I mean, if you have a Fireface 400 or 800, you can still use it in 2025. So we're talking about over 20 years of driver support. That is insane. On top of that, RME interfaces weren't just traditional ADAT converters. They were also format converters, meaning next to the traditional analog to digital conversion, you could also format ADAT to MADI, MADI to ADAT, AES to SPDIF, or whatever you had at the same time. So RME interfaces had huge channel counts, were super reliable, flexible, and were just powerhouses. And I can say that this is also the case for the M1620. I mean, look at the back. This is absolutely insane what you have available, and we will go through all the options. So let's take a look. Taking a look at the back, it's quite clear that the M1620 Pro is packed. Not much more space where you could put in another connector. This thing is full, maxed out, and I love it. So let's start with the analog IOs. We have 16 inputs and 16 outputs via DSOP. And these sound absolutely phenomenal. Top spec analog IOs. Tested them. It's super, super well made. One of the things you need to consider is, especially if you have multi-channel analog IOs, the fact that everything is so tied together, there could be crosstalk issues or anything related to that. So noise could increase once we go closer to the power supply, or because of the digital I/O. Nothing of that will happen with the M1620 Pro because they have so many layers for grounding inside that inside of the M1620 Pro on the main board. So it's absolutely phenomenal. All the 16 inputs and outputs, they perform the same, absolutely phenomenal. Next to that, we have the Wordclock. If you work in certain scenarios, then Wordclock is still very important. Then we have 4 ADAT inputs and outputs. And you might ask, why so many ADAT inputs and outputs? Well, because of the limitations of ADAT, that is reducing or halving the channel count once you go up the sample rate. It could be quite handy to have more inputs and outputs available so you can use them still in conjunction with all the IOs available. So if you go to 96 kilohertz, you still have, you know, like 16 ports available and stuff like that. Sorry, 16 channels available of ADAT. Then we have MADI via BNC connection. We call that also coaxial MADI. That is independently usable from the MADI you see here. That is MADI optical. Both can be used at the same time in redundancy or for redundancy purposes, to be exact. There is an additional SFP module which you can get in order to operate the optical MADI that you can get from RME as well. Then there is the USB port, and the USB port is not for audio connection. It is for the fact that you have a remote control that you can use then with the M1620 Pro, and you can do the firmware updates here. Then we have two power sockets, one big one, which is the typical AC, and then we have a DC, and these again can also be used redundant, which is super, super cool. All right, that's the back of the M1620 Pro. We have 4 main pages that we can select via the dial, and in the state view you can actually see the first thing that I really, really love, and that is the redundant power supply operation. So we have an AC input and we have a DC input. And if I switch now to redundancy, that means if I have 2 power supplies connected, then I have a redundant mode switch. But because I only have the AC input connected, I get a warning that this is not redundant at the moment. How cool is that? So let's switch that off again. Next to that is actually the preset menu. And that means we have 16 preset slots where we can save the whole state of the M1620. That is crazy. Then we have an Autolock that we could also use for saving not only the preset, but also locking the whole device. So with that Autolock, nobody can access the M1620 if he or she doesn't have a code available. That is super important for operations where you don't want any security issues, you know, like especially on the road, you don't want anyone to change settings of your converter. Then we can change the metering settings, the front panel. I will show you that, how beautiful that looks. It's just the ballistics of the screen, of the front LED screen is just beautiful. Then we have the HTTP remote, and we can see the address of our device. And also we can check the level, or sorry, the temperature of our processor. We can take a look at the fan speed. We could also use a different conversion filter for the ADATs. And yeah, we see the software remote and the device name and all of that. Really, really cool. Next to that is the input menu. And here we can actually set all the different inputs. We have analog input channels, we have MADI coaxial, we have MADI optical, we have ADAT, and we have, of course, Dante. So this is the Dante version. There is also a AVB/Milan version available. And with the Dante version, what you get is if you connect this to a computer with a Dante virtual sound card, you can stream straight from the device. So this would behave like a Dante sound card. What I love most about the M1620 Pro and the M32 Pro and all these devices that share the same architecture and come from the same family is the fact that I can actually change the reference level for every analog channel, input and output wise. How cool is that? I can set it from 24 to 19 to 13 dBu, and I can do that for every channel independently. That is just a super brilliant feature, and I love that because sometimes if I have compressors connected or EQs connected, I rather limit my settings straight in the device. That is super, super powerful. Next to that, we have the clock setting. Not much to talk here. We get all the clock sources, and as you can see, there are a lot. We have the internal, we have Dante, we could set the Wordclock or the MADI optical or coaxial. We can, just do a lot. We can set the sampling rate here, it goes up to 192K, of course. I set it to 48 all the time because that's where I'm working in. And yeah, that's super, super useful as well. Then we have the last page, which is the output page. And here we can actually set the routing. So not only can I configure again the reference level for each output, but I could also route my signals to the analog outputs. So I can set the Dante channels, for example. So here I can set the Dante channel to each of the analog channels. I could go for everything in that routing setting. So let me go through that, sorry. So I have all the 64 Dante channels available. Then I could route the analog back to the outputs, the inputs, the MADI coaxial inputs. I have all those 64 channels available as well, MADI optical and ADAT. And this is what I was mentioning prior. These are format converters, super capable, and I just love it. So yeah, then we have the two headphone outputs on the front, which we can also access through the phone switch on the front. Also super, super cool. We can link those. We can also set them to different reference level. So if I set these to 90 dBu, this will become in fact an additional line output, hence the name 1620. We have 16 inputs and 20 outputs, meaning 16 outputs on the back, and then we have additional 2 stereo outputs on the front, which means 20. We can route signals, of course, to the ADAT output, to the MADIs, and to the Dante output, respectively. And remember, we could also route digital signals to each of those. So we could have an old MADI infrastructure and route that to the Dante. So this could become your Dante converter in an existing studio setup, right? Or you could route your ADAT to your MADI stream. This is so flexible. It's so powerful. I just love it. It is just a center for your studio, right? We have on top of that also a super cool remote, which we can use via a web browser, and then we can do the routings as well, save our settings, and also do the firmware updates via that remote software, which is then connected either via Ethernet port on the back or USB. So that's the overall menu. I won't go into details of everything. I would just wanted to highlight what the main features are, so you now know what the M1620 Pro is capable of. For those of you who are not fans of menu diving, RME has got you covered with the web remote. And as the name suggests, that is a remote that you can access through your web browser. And the web remote works independently from Total Mix effects. Not only because the converter doesn't have Total Mix because it's not a sound card, but a converter, but also because of the design philosophy. The M1620 Pro, as every converter in the M series, is designed to work in audio over IP or Dante networks and infrastructures. So the idea is that I can remote control my converter from the web browser and do all my settings and routings straight here in the web browser. So how can I access the web browser? Well, that's very easy. All you have to do is connect your M1620 Pro either via Ethernet or USB, and then you get an IP address in the menu of the M1620, and that address you can just enter into your address bar of your web browser, and then the web remote pops up. If you've entered the web remote, you have everything that you've seen in the menu overview also available here, plus a little bit more. So we have, for example, the option to check the firmware, and if there is a new firmware available, then we can also update the firmware. We can also do regular update checks. That could be done here as well. We can see, of course, the device health, which means temperature of the processor and the overall device. And then we have a fan control. That is super, super cool. And then we could also use this icon over here, this lamp. If we have several devices, then we can see which one we actually have selected, because then your device that is currently selected will flash. It looks very funny. We also have access to the manual, to the web manual. That is also pretty cool. And then we have on top all the options that you've seen in the state overview, in the clock overview, and in the input and output settings, such as the state of the power supplies, the preset menu. We can check for the visual feedback, so the front panel LED on and off. We can set the global ballistics of the metering, so either peak or RMS, right? We have the routing menu, which I come to in a bit. So let's go out of that again. Then we have the clocking, the actual clocking sample rate. We have the option for Dante, since this is the Dante version of the M1620 Pro. And then, of course, we have all the settings for our different clocks available. Sync to external is on because I don't use Dante at this point. I've just connected that via my Ethernet switch to my Mac, and that's it. And then, yeah, we have all the routings available and all the settings. So I can select all my analog inputs, for example, and set the reference level for all my analog inputs. I could do the same with my analog outputs, but not only that, I can also mute them here straight, right? I can mute all of them at once, and I can deselect them again. I, of course, have the settings for the phones, and you can see here that if I, for example, save my preset now, and my preset icon switches back to green, and if I now change anything in my preset, you see that it now is orange again. That means I've changed something within my preset. Pretty cool, and gives me just a lot of flexibility and also very good visual feedback of what is going on. What I love most is actually the routing menu. So if I go to my routing menu, I can actually route all my signals that I want to. In this case, I have 16 channels from my MADI stream. So I've hooked the M1620 Pro to my HDSPE MADI effects card that sends out a test signal on 16 channels. And if I select now my grid here, you can actually see that I can select different options here. So different numerations, so to say. And you can see that I can select all 64 channels at once, or I can deselect them. And if I set my grid to 4, then I can chuck those in a group of 4. Super easy and great to work with. So let's deselect that. So let's say I want to select 8 channels from my MADI stream and send those to ADAT port number 2. Well, then I just select them and drag them over to ADAT channels 1 to 8 on port number 3. And now you can see the selection has been made and the signal is going through that port as well. The same is true, of course, for Dante. So I could send out 16 channels that are active at the moment, or let's do it, let's go crazy. Let's select all the 64 channels and select those to the 64 Dante channels that are available. That is super impressive, right? So this is now my routing matrix. And again, if I like that, I can save that. I could also do with a revert, could do an undo. I can download that. I can rename it. I can do so much in this web remote. It's crazy. But yeah, the web remote is available for all M series owners. So M1620 Pro, M32 Pro, all these units have the web remote available. It's constantly updated, as you know from RME, and it's free, of course. So you can access that and do your settings if you're not a fan of, menu diving as I am. So cool. That's the web remote. That's something I wanted to share as well. And I hope you enjoyed my walkthrough of the M1620 Pro. This will become the centerpiece of my studio now. I will hook up all my converters that I have here, my ADI2, some of my dirty outboard gear that I have that it has also digital IOs. I will hook that up. And certainly my SPL MixDream summing mixer. So all my analog summing will be going through the M1620 Pro from now on. So you can hear the M1620 Pro in the near future. We will also do some videos about the summing setup. So how I would set up my Logic session for that. So you can witness the sheer amount of power that this has in the future. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, as always, write them in the comment section below, and I see you in the next video.